Taking a deep breath in. And letting go. One more. Hello. If for those of you at home, you're welcome to do that with us as well. Welcome, YouTube family, as always. So today we are continuing our talk of returning to the code. Last week we talked about the first 3 tenets of living peace. This week we're talking about the next 3, and then next week we'll talk about the final 3. And just a short recap, the first 3 are mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, and mastery of emotion. And you'll be able to find the video for that in our video section. But today we're going to be talking about the 3 illusions and Dunisha and living peace. But most likely we're probably only going to be able to have time to get to 2 of them. Last week I didn't realize I was talking for 45 minutes, so I appreciate everyone in our audience that was able to stick it through. And we still had a juicy conversation afterwards about all of that. So that was pretty cool, but I definitely want to be more mindful of the time this week. So this is just a quick recap of the code itself. In Dunisha, the living peace code is our anchor for clarity, presence, and peace. No matter what circumstances arise in our life, we can always return to the code to receive its stabilizing influence. So once again, the first one is mastery of thought. We return to looking at how our perceptions are huing our reality. The next one is mastery of impulse. How are we behaving in this moment? Are we being a reactive creature, or are we being responsive? And then, of course, we have mastery of emotion, which is really tuning in with the emotional waves that are coming over us. I'm sure many of us have heard that whole proverb or whatever it is, just a short little quote, don't make a permanent decision based off of a temporary emotion or feeling. In Zen, they often like to describe feelings as waves upon the ocean, to where waves, as soon as they rise up, they eventually begin to recede back into the ocean. And so when we're able to really take a look at emotions as temporary manifestations, then it's a lot easier to process them, but also recognizing that emotion in and of itself is neutral, neither right nor wrong, good nor bad. It's all neutral across the board. Even when we're feeling shame or guilt or anger, if we're able to look at it more neutrally versus as this awful negative thing that needs to get away from me, then you're able to explore it more and find the root of it more rather than resisting it, because it's often in our resistance that we keep negative emotions alive. And those negative emotions, even though they're not so much negative, but they do lead to separation, they do lead to reaction, they do lead to conflict. And so that's how we learn to process them. Again, our video for that is last week. But today, the first tenet, or rather the 4th tenet that we're going to talk about, is ignorance is an illusion. And for those of you who have your handout, you can go ahead and fill in, we seek understanding. So ignorance is an illusion, we seek, and then the fill in is understanding. And then the 2 arts associated with it, which you can also fill in, which we'll talk about shortly, is the art of compassion and the art of gentle curiosity. These are a little bit different than the arts I've taught in the past, so this might be new for some folks who've been studying with us for a while. But the art of compassion and the art of gentle curiosity. And one of my favorite quotes from Living Peace is, compassion dissolves ignorance. Compassion dissolves ignorance. And just for a short, hot moment, think about a time you've been upset. You probably weren't very compassionate when you were feeling anger or frustration or grief, and it could even be towards yourself. Whenever we're upset, generally it's void of compassion. And anytime we're upset, we generally have a very hard perception or hard opinion about someone or something or ourselves. And generally it almost leads to greater conflict and separation within ourselves. And so that's why we always want to invite in the cooling waters of compassion that can then eventually soothe our fire within us, that then allows for understanding to take place. And I'm going to read an excerpt from At Home in the World by Thich Nhat Hanh, Stories and Essential Teachings from a Monk's Life. And I'm going to warn you, this is a pretty It's an intense topic, and it might be challenging, and also an intense approach that not a lot of people in our society are comfortable with. And so just bear with me to the end. But this is why we take such inspiration from Buddhist monks, especially Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage, just because he shows and embodies the essence of unconditional peace and unconditional love. So let's take a breath. And so this is page 79, and it's titled, Call Me by My True Names. It's a little bit long. In the early years of my exile in France, I learned of an 11-year-old girl escaping from Vietnam with her family and other boat people. She was raped by a pirate right there on her boat. Her father tried to intervene, but the pirate threw her father into the sea. After the child was raped, she jumped into the ocean to commit suicide. We received the news of this tragedy one day when we were working in a Buddhist peace delegation office in Paris. I was so upset I could not sleep. I felt anger, blame, and despair. That evening, in sitting meditation, I visualized myself being born as a baby boy in a poor fishing family on the coast of Thailand. My father was a fisherman. He couldn't read. He had never gone to school or to temple. He had never received any Buddhist teaching or any kind of education. The politicians, educators, and social workers in Thailand had never helped my father. My mother also couldn't read, and she didn't know how to raise her children. My father's family had been poor fishermen for many generations. My grandfather and my great-grandfather had been fishermen too. When I turned 13, I also became a fisherman. I had never gone to school. I had never felt loved or understood, and lived in chronic poverty that persisted from generations to the next. Then one day, another young fisherman said to me, "Let's go out to the ocean. There are boat people who pass nearby here, and they often carry gold and jewelry, sometimes even money. Just one trip and we could be free of this poverty." I accepted the invitation, thinking, we only need to take a little bit of their jewelry. It won't do any harm, and then we could be free of this poverty. So I became a pirate. The first time I go out, I'm not even aware that I became a pirate. Once out on the ocean, I start to see the other pirates raping young women on the boats. I had never touched a young woman. I had never even thought about holding hands or going out with a young woman. But then on a boat, there is a very beautiful young woman and no policeman there to stop me. I had seen other people doing it, and I asked myself, why don't I try it too? This is my chance to try the body of a young woman, and so I did. If you were there on the boat and had a gun, you might have shot me. But shooting me wouldn't help me. Nobody had ever taught me how to love, how to understand, how to see the suffering of others. My father and mother were not taught this either. I didn't know what was wholesome and what was unwholesome. I didn't understand cause and effect. I was living in the dark. If you had a gun, you could shoot me, and I would die. But you wouldn't be able to help me at all. As I continued sitting, I saw hundreds of babies being born that night right along the coast of Thailand in similar situations, many of them baby boys. If the politicians and cultural ministers could look deeply, they could see that within 20 years, those babies would become pirates. When I was able to see that, I understood the actions of the pirate. When I put myself in the situation of being born into a family that was uneducated and poor from generation to the next, I saw that I would not be able to avoid becoming a pirate. When I saw that, my hatred vanished and I could feel compassion for the pirate. When I saw those babies being born and growing up with no help, I knew that I had to do something so that they could not become pirates. The energy of a bodhisattva, a compassionate being with limitless love, grew inside me. I didn't suffer anymore. I could embrace not only suffering of the 11-year-old child who was raped, but also the suffering of the pirate. Deep breath. So when you address me as Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh or Venerable Nhat Hanh, I answer yes. When you call me the name of the child who was raped, I also answer yes. If you call me the name of the pirate, I will also say yes. Depending on where I was born and under which circumstances I grew up, I might have been the girl or I might have been the pirate. I am the child in Uganda or in the Congo, all skin and bones, my 2 legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I'm also the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to the Congo. Those poor children in the Congo do not need bombs, they need food to eat. But here in the US, we live by producing bombs and guns. And if we want others to buy bombs and guns, then we have to create wars. If we call the name of the child, if you call out to the name of the Congo, I answer yes. If you call the names of those who produce bombs and guns, I also answer yes. When I'm able to see that I am all those people, my hatred disappears. I am determined to live in such a way that I can help the victims and also help those who create and perpetuate wars and destruction. Deep breath. So as you can see, Thich Nhat Hanh, who grew up during time of multiple wars, including the Vietnam War as a Buddhist monk, and saw his countrymen and brothers and sisters die, even amidst that, he still cultivated the heart of the Bodhisattva, the hearts of unconditional love and kindness. And so throughout his entire life, anytime he would be challenged with a thought of someone that he might have perceived as an enemy or someone evil or someone bad or wrong, he would often go into a meditative practice of viewing himself being born as that individual and seeing how the law of cause and effect led from one action to the next action, to the next action, into the next action. Very often when we judge people, we just look at the surface level issue. We just look at the surface level action or crime, and then we judge their entire life, their entire being, their entire existence, and their entire worth based off of 1, 2, or 3 things. And then we often lock them away, and then we forget about them, going back to our own distracted lives, not realizing that that could have been us, or for some of us that may have been us, especially for those of us who have battled addiction, because a lot of times addiction leads into other conflicts, may not be necessarily crime conflicts, but we definitely might have hurt our children, our spouses, our family, and especially ourselves. And so, who has ever been judged as being a bad person before? Or a sinner? Mm-hmm. Or who in this room or watching at home have judged someone in the same light? And yet what's fascinating is that when we're judged, we often, all we desire is compassion and understanding, unless we believe that we're fully deserving of it, which can be a gateway to healing, but often it actually keeps us trapped in guilt. And when we're trapped in guilt, it repeats our cycles of pain, addiction, conflict, codependency, et cetera, et cetera. But really think about that, how quick we are to judge other people when very often we are judged in the same way. And so my invitation to all of you to practice, there is no ignorance, or rather ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding. I'm going to invite you to pick someone and imagine yourself being born as them. And imagine yourself going from age to age, situation to situation. And of course, some of this is illusory because you have to put pieces together. But if the outcome is deeper understanding and compassion, it's quite beautiful. It's quite beautiful. And for many of you, for many of us who may have actually felt physical, emotional, spiritual, or even sexual abuse, many of us, it comes from people that we knew well. And that's the unfortunate truth for a lot of us, that a lot of the people that have felt deep abuse, it often here in America comes from those who are supposed to love us and protect us. So we do know their stories, and we can imagine ourselves being born as them because we know where they come from. So it becomes a bit more real for us. And so let's go ahead and take a deep breath. So that story from Thich Nhat Hanh is all about how to cultivate compassion. And as we previously said, compassion dissolves ignorance. And the other art that I mentioned, because the first art is of compassion, the second art is of gentle curiosity. Now we understand why we need to cultivate gentle curiosity within ourselves. Because if we don't cultivate gentle curiosity, we're never going to take the time to actually try to understand other people, other situations, and build bridges of communication, build bridges of acceptance, build bridges of forgiveness, build bridges of understanding. Who's opinionated? Who has some opinions out there? Aren't opinions self-reinforced biases? Really think about that. They're often self-reinforced biases that we're no good, other people are no good, and we're just judging ourselves and others repeatedly. And what's fascinating for those of us who've heard about the law of attraction is that if you understand the law of attraction, which maybe I'll give a full talk on one day, but like attracts like. And what's interesting is if you believe something so much, you're going to create experiences that reinforce that. And maybe you're not into the metaphysical side of the law of attraction, but maybe you've developed neural pathways in your mind that completely block out all other information. So the only thing that you're actually able to receive is things that already agree with your notion of reality. And anything that challenges that, you actually have like selective hearing. I'm sure we can all relate to a time where we may have had selective hearing. Because when we get uncomfortable, it's very easy to tune things out. And that's why here in Dunisha and in the Living Peace teachings, we practice so much on learning how to lean into discomfort, learning how to lean into conflict, into pain, and into all the things that make us go, oh. Because that's where true and deep wisdom occurs. And that's how we go from having a very limited perspective of ourselves in the world and having the expanded perspective that some might call enlightenment. But we're really not after chasing the goal of enlightenment, because that can lead to the whole arrogant self-righteousness thing where you think you've achieved something and you're just like, well, I know stuff. And that's why the 8th tenet of living peace is release knowing, to bring us back to humility. But at the same time, our goal is cultivating inner peace. And the only way for us to embody inner peace is for us to root out the core wounds within us, really get to know them, hold space for them, and eventually over time they start to heal. So let's breathe that in. So your check-in, because we have written down here check-in, it's going to be very soft. I'm going to have you write down the question, how can I soften my perceptions? How can I soften my perceptions? How can I soften my perceptions? And really another way you can say that is, how can I soften my opinions? I think I might have talked a little bit about this last week, but in a lot of instances, a great question to ask yourself is, do I need to have an opinion about this? Do I need to have an opinion about this person? Do I need to have this opinion about myself? And so how can I soften this opinion? How can I soften my perceptions? Every time you're triggered this week, every time you feel that coming up, ask yourself, how can I soften this? How can I soften my awareness and how I'm judging the situation? And you're going to notice that it might be hard at first, but if you ask yourself this constantly throughout the day, it does get easier. And you're going to notice that it almost forces critical thinking skills, where you have to think of new ways to perceive something or new ways to explain something. Isn't that beautiful? So for me, example, I was tortured as a child by my peers in school. Or I could say I was taught immense compassion because I felt deep pain. And I never wanted anyone else to suffer the way that I suffered at the hands of my peers. So you see that there's two stories and they're both equally true. But I chose this route. And so that's an example of softening perception and changing stories. Practice. So the practice to write in, very basic. It's simply going to be understanding, parentheses, self and others. Parentheses, self and others. Understanding. And so maybe on your mirror when you wake up, or wherever you look at in the mirror, or even on the fridge, a sticky note, you can even write down, my intent today is to understand others deeply. Because if you actually have that intention in your mind throughout the day, it's actually going to create some pause. It's going to invite you to slow down a little bit and to actually take time to understand, rather than some of us might be kind of just a whirlwind that goes throughout the day from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Someone pisses us off, we just kind of say F them and then we move on to the next thing. But really, let's take the time to understand anyone who crosses my path. It's not so much assumption or speculating, but it's more about a soft understanding, a gentle curiosity, and developing compassion. because a lot of times we analyze other people, but it tends to turn into judgment. So let's go ahead and take a deep breath. So our next tenet that we're going to talk about is chaos is an illusion, we seek harmony. And so the fill-in blank there is harmony. Chaos is an illusion, we seek harmony. And the two arts associated with this, which again, there might be different for some of you out there from who've studied this years ago with me. Art of neutrality and the art of grace, which are actually a bit similar to what I used to teach, because I used to teach the art of objectivity and the art of allowing. But both objectivity is in neutrality, just as allowing is in grace. And so I'm going to go ahead and read a next excerpt from At Home in the World, which really captures the essence of chaos and harmony. And it's a cute story. It's a bit softer than the last story. But I am not very great at pronouncing Vietnamese names. But with Thich Nhat Hanh, as we may know, notice the H is silent after the T. So both of these names have a TH, so I'm going to pronounce them just as T and not th, like how we would pronounce it. So page 104. So this is the apple juice and pine cones story. And the girl's name I'll be talking about is Tan Toi. And so, again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not. So apple juice and pine cones. One day, 4 children were playing at our sweet potatoes community outside Paris. One was Tan Toi, who was not yet 4.5. The other 3 were her friends from school. Toi was staying with us for several months while her father looked for a job in Paris. The 4 children ran off to play on the hillside behind the house and were gone for about an hour. When they returned to ask for something to drink, I took out our last bottle of homemade apple juice and gave them each a full glass, serving Toi last. Since her juice was from the bottom of the bottle, it had some pulp in it. When she noticed the particles, she pouted and refused to drink it. So the 4 children went back to their games and at the hillside. Toi had not drunk anything. Half an hour later, while I was meditating in my room, I heard her calling. Toi wanted to get herself a glass of cold water, but even on tiptoes, she could not reach the faucet. I reminded her of the glass of juice on the table and asked her to drink it first. Turning to look at it, she saw that the pulp had settled and the juice looked clear and delicious. She went to the table and took the glass with both hands. After drinking half of it, she put it down and asked, "Is this a different glass of juice, Uncle Monk?" "No," I answered. "It's the same one as before. It sat quietly for a bit, and now it's clear and delicious." Toi looked at the glass again. "It really is good. Was it meditating like you, Uncle Monk?" I laughed and patted her head. "Let's say that I imitate the apple juice when I sit. That is closer to the truth." Without a doubt, Toi thought that the apple juice was sitting for a while to clear itself, just like her Uncle Monk. I think that Toi, not yet 4.5, had understood the meaning of meditation without any explanation. The apple juice became clear after resting a while. In the same way, if we rest in meditation a while, we too become clear. This clarity refreshes us and gives us strength and serenity. When we feel refreshed, our surroundings also become refreshed. Let's take a breath. So isn't that just a delicious, beautiful explanation of meditation? Such a beautiful visual of it. And even a 4.5-year-old was able to understand it just by seeing monks meditating and clearing themselves with their own emotions. They were able to pick up just how the glass was able to purify itself. And so how many of us show our children meditation? Show us calming ourselves, and then they're able to see the result of when we take deep breaths in. And prior, we were a bit worked up, and then after, for sitting maybe for 5 minutes, they notice that we return to our inner calm. How many of us maybe see our spouses doing that, or we're showing that to our family members, or maybe at work with our colleagues, or in any situation. What a great example that would set for the world and everyone we interact with whenever we feel triggered by and we feel that chaos starting to swirl up within our chest, within our mind, that we take a few minutes pause and then we return to the conversation, we return to the situation with more clarity, with more openness, with more clearness. Wouldn't that be delicious? So let's breathe that in. So we have the art of neutrality. And Dunisha, Andrew talked a little bit about this, mentioning the teaching from Living in Peace earlier before we started the sermon today. But we do teach this a lot, how life itself does seem chaotic, doesn't it? But for a moment, take out humanity, take out the judgment of humans, and just look at the planet neutrally. Look at it just with nature. If you look at nature, it is neutral in and of itself, even when there is violence, such as a coyote eating a rabbit, or a volcano exploding, or a hurricane devastating the land. It's neutral. You know, yes, there's violence there. Yes, there's harm that is caused to the environment, but in and of itself, it is just neutral. Because once you put a human down, humans are what create judgment. They're what label things as good, bad, right, wrong. The animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the sky kingdom, none of that does that. It's just life moving forward. But I always like to give the example, especially in sessions, when you look at a coyote eating a rabbit, you're just like, it's the cycle of life. But when the rabbit was your pet, you want revenge. And so it's so interesting how we project our human personality onto things and our human opinions onto things. And it really gets us twisted up within ourselves, rather than being able to look at life as neutral. Even we judge death as something awful and bad and negative, when even it itself is neutral as well. And so to really cultivate harmony, it's important for us to start looking through the world, looking at the world through the lens of a neutral perception. And this will really help us along our journey. Just as it's important for us to cultivate a bit of grace in our actions and our behaviors. Who rushes to do things from here to here to here? So your homework is to add a bit more grace in your movements, to add a bit more grace in your speech. Especially if you ever find my first sermon I've ever given when I was, 21? I think 20. I was still 21 at the time. Holy shiitake mushrooms. I was all over the place. My hands were like this, and I was very dynamic because I had a theater background. And so my way of making people laugh was to be over the top on everything. I once had a theater teacher that he loved me because I always made the room crack up. But it's just like every monologue I gave, I would burst into tears at the end. Like I was just having a meltdown. Really good at acting that. But that definitely came over from my theater background into how I was presenting as a sermon. I was just too much at times. And so I eventually actually started holding crystals, hard, heavy crystals in my hands to plant them. So I wasn't like this on the screen, because watching it, I mean, it was definitely giving some our YouTubers headaches. So yes, if you ever see that, feel free. You'll notice how there's a bit of chaotic energy in me, which we could call nervousness. And then I learned to add more grace into my emotions, into my behavior, into my speech. And then that was able to bring more harmony into how I interacted with the world. And so your check-in for today under this tenet is, how can I soften my actions? And so for the first check-in, we had, how can I soften my perceptions? And for this check-in, it's going to be, how can I soften my actions? Am I being a bit hasty? And if so, how can I soften that? One of my biggest triggers for me personally, it's hard for me if I ever know I have like a meeting and if I'm running late, I still feel that like, woo, coming up. And so I notice that if I'm in the car, you have that intention to want to push the gas pedal a little bit harder. And so one of my biggest things still to this day is I learned to even soften that, recognizing that if I'm going to be late somewhere, it's not the end of the world and that it's okay. And that it's not a reason good enough for me personally to lose my peace. And so that's something, even to this day, I still recognize within me. And so I have to take some deep breaths and to make sure I'm still adding grace to that moment. Grace rather than haste. Oh, write that down. I like that. And another quote from Living Peace you can also write down if you want is, peace is never in a hurry. Peace is never in a hurry. And I wish it was a poet. It was, he was a famous poet, Asian poet. I'm not sure if it's from China or Japan, but he said something along the lines of one of my favorite poems, doing something along the lines of, doing nothing, spring comes every year and the grass grows by itself. Even by doing nothing, spring comes every year and the grass grows by itself. And so that's a reflection for me. It's like, who's a micromanager that tries to solve and fix everything? Nonetheless, spring is still going to come, the grass is going to pop back up, and it's going to grow by itself, with or without your intervention. And so that's taught me a lot over the years to not intervene into other people's lives and to really take that hands-off approach and holding space rather than falling into that fixer mentality, Mr. Fix-It or Mrs. Fix-It. I'm sure some of us can relate to that. In Dunisha, you'll notice in Living Peace, we're not your typical church. And I've been judged for this over the years. I have been judged for this because a lot of times in pastoral communities, the pastors are very, very engaged in people's home lives, and they'll show up and they bake pies. I always just imagine, the pastor's wife with a pie at every occasion. I mean, that's a stereotype, but there is some truth to it where it's just like they're very engaged in your life. And here it's different. We're engaged in your life as in equal measure to how much you invite us into your life. And a lot of that takes the form of one-on-one sessions and how we root things out together. But we're not the type that are holding people's hands or trying to fix the solutions, because we recognize the importance for each individual to have their own ultimate freedom. And for me to think of, I know what's best for you, that's a judgment. And that you may also notice in those communities, there tends to be some guilt and a lot of expectation. And again, that's not right or wrong, good or bad, but that just kind of explains how we definitely take more of a hands-off approach in how we cultivate community, which is not everyone's cup of tea. But at the same time, what I like to tell people is, I'm going to have to cuss for this one. I love telling people I don't give a shit about you. I haven't said that in a while, but I love to sometimes say that I don't give a shit about you. You're new, so it's fun saying that. Because it's almost freeing. There's a freedom in it because you can feel the love in my voice right now, hopefully, because it's there. But at the same time, it's free of judgment. And I'm not going to try and wiggle my way in and plant some manipulation or expectation on how you should be behaving this way to meet my idea of what's right. And so when I say we don't give a shit about you, it's actually a very big saying of unconditional love and unconditional peace. But we still love showing up in community. We still develop some attachments. But there is a deep, deep love that comes with that deep peace that comes from that deep attachment. Does that make sense? It's interesting. It might be a new teaching for some of you, but there's deep wisdom. There really is deep wisdom in it. But that is how we turn chaos into harmony. Because when you care so deeply about someone, who's gotten chaotic because you love someone so much? Who's lost your peace because you love someone so much? right? And so love can often be a source of our chaos. And we've learned over the years to make sure peace comes first. And in our peace, we can actually show up and give unconditional love. Unconditional. What unconditional love means is that no matter the behavior of another, we are able to maintain our vibrational alignment with peace so that we can show up and be of assistance without constantly losing our balance or getting wrapped up into someone's drama or someone's chaos. If that makes sense. So this is so weird for me to say. I've never said this before. Love a little bit less, people. Just love a little bit, or rather, love softer. Love softer. And make sure there's peace involved. Because if your love has a tendency to lead to conflict, that's not actually true love. That is attachment. That is the ego feeling attached to something, and it feels like it needs to control it, it needs to save it. And who's ever been on the receiving end of that before? When someone is judging you and they're trying to save you, it doesn't feel good. You don't feel seen, you may not feel understood. And so that's why we really want to cultivate that here. And so the practice that you can go ahead and write down is harmonizing mind, heart, and body. Harmonizing mind, heart, and body. And really another way of saying that is relaxing into this moment. Something I've been practicing a lot lately is how can I relax into this moment? Whatever moment I'm in, how can I relax into it? Because it's when I feel relaxed that I give my best work. Because think about it, if you have to go, so I was on the morning news once, Fox 10 Morning News, talking about my book. Holy heck, I was nervous. And I blacked out kind of for part of it. Just because I've never been there, and then you walk into a room and then it's pretty much all empty. And then there's just all these cameras pointed at you. And when you're watching the news, it's very colorful, and they have all the stage, but the stage is only 10% of the room. The rest is just stone and cold and mechanical looking at you. And it was my first time. I didn't know where to look. And anyway, I still did a decent job, but there was definitely a moment where I'm just what am I saying right now? But watching it back, it was okay. I wish I had been relaxed in that moment, because had I been relaxed, I would have been able to speak clearly. So whether when we're worked up, when we have that little bit of chaos in us, be it anxiousness, nervousness, grief, it could be anger, anything, we're not able to really present our full mind, body, heart connection. We're not able to fully bring it into the moment. But when we're relaxed and we're able to learn how to process stress and then release stress, you're going to notice your effectiveness skyrockets. Pretty cool, huh? And in short, that's what meditation's for. And it harkens back to the apple juice story that we shared from Thich Nhat Hanh, and how that 4.5-year-old was able to recognize how when the bottle shaked up, the pulp's everywhere, but after a while, just giving it time to just sit and be still, it settles. So giving ourselves permission to sit and be still is an absolute necessity each day, not just something nice to do when we feel inspired. It's a necessity for our own mind, body, heart connection and harmony. So let's take a breath. So I'll go ahead and pause there, because if I go on the next topic, it'll at least take 15 to 20 minutes, because duality is a big one. So we covered ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding, and chaos is an illusion, we seek harmony. We learn to cultivate the art of compassion and the art of gentle curiosity, and we learn to cultivate the art of neutrality and the art of grace. This is a lifelong practice, and that's why we love coming together weekly to remind ourselves, and so that we can cultivate this anchor of peace within our lives. So taking a deep breath in and letting go, honoring this moment, honoring ourselves, honoring all of you, honoring this life. We breathe in. We say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so it is. So as always, for our YouTube family, links are down below for our website and various donation options if you would like to support our, so I was going to say ministry. It's not really a ministry. Support our community, support our, eventually our monkhoodness, and then all future projects that we'll be having going on, which I'm so excited to share in a few weeks. But for now, we'll just let things rest for a little bit. See you next week.